The morning was quiet, the sun was slowly rising above the horizon, shining through a light haze over the cracked earth. Dust rose from the wheels of heavy jeeps as they drove into a refugee camp located in the middle of nowhere, a geographical spot you wouldn't find in a tourist guidebook. But it was here, among the tents, UN posters, and yellow, burnt grass, that those who had been left with no other choice waited. Angelina Jolie sat silently in the back seat of her car, staring out the window. This wasn't her first time here. Her eyes held neither the curious gleam of a journalist nor the bewilderment of a tourist. Just a focused, silent compassion. Over the years of traveling to the most traumatized places on the planet, she had learned to read silence. She knew what lost hope looked like, and how the last hope trembled in the air when cameras and big names arrived, but this time she left the cameras behind. There would be no press corps here, no hot headlines. She had arrived quietly, just to be. The guards opened the car door. One of them offered his hand, but she got out on her own. She was wearing a long cotton shirt and a plain dark scarf, not to offend, but out of respect for the local women. The camp was waking up slowly. Women were carrying buckets to the communal tap, children were playing with plastic bottles that replaced their bowls. It smelled of sand, fatigue, and life that somehow still lingered here despite everything. Angelina approached the group of volunteers, exchanging greetings. The translator walked alongside, but she rarely addressed him. Intonation, a look, and a simple touch sometimes said more than any words. She noticed a girl about 10 sitting on the floor under the tent, holding a smaller child in her arms. The child's eyes were large and defenseless. She went over and sat down next to her. "What's her name?" she asked quietly. "Rhea," the older girl replied, hugging her sister even tighter. "She hasn't spoken since that day." The translator behind her finished his sentence, but Angelina already understood. She smiled softly, pulled a small teddy bear out of her backpack. She held it out without a word. The girl didn't take it right away. But a moment later, very carefully she reached out. Angelina put her hand on her shoulder, and although there were no words or promises, they both understood. This moment was important. She didn't even notice when more people began to gather around her. It started with a whisper. Then someone came closer. Someone wanted to take a picture. Someone just wanted to touch. Someone was indignant. The crowd became denser, more mobile. One of the guards whispered something alarming into his earpiece. "We have to get you out," he said to Jolie, but she continued talking to the woman who had just come up, the one holding the boy with the broken leg in her arms. Her eyes were moist. She spoke quietly, quickly. About loss. About the road here. About the night they crossed the border barefoot. Suddenly someone shouted from behind, caught voices. A man's scream. Then another. The guards pushed back toward her. Someone stepped on a plastic canister, a dull explosion underfoot. Everyone moved in different directions. Several people stumbled, children screamed, "Madam! Back!" She backed away, but the direction was unclear. The crowd was trying to leave or, on the contrary, to get closer. The car door was too far away, everything was happening too fast, and just then when the guards were pressed in, when she herself felt her feet slipping in the dust, someone grabbed her elbow. Strongly, but carefully. "This way," came a loud, feminine voice. She was being dragged through the crowd. Not a guard. Not an organizer. Just a woman in a faded tunic, with a face tired from the sun, but eyes that were not afraid of anything. She didn't let go of her hands until she had led her outside the old canvas awning, where it was already quiet. Angelina only took a deep breath. Her heart was beating fast, but inside there was something different, something new. A simple mother stood nearby, without ID. Without status, but it was she, not the guards, not the coordinators who had just saved her. Angelina looked at her for a long time, and then she asked quietly, "What is your name?" The woman was silent for a moment. "Samira, Samira." The name stuck in Angelina's head as clearly as if it were part of some long-forgotten story from her own life. They stood in a narrow passage between two large tents. There were no cameras, no microphones, no prying eyes. Just two women from completely different worlds, brought together for a moment by something more than circumstance, a human presence. Samira didn't smile. She just stared at Jolie, not with surprise, not with adoration, but with the same directness with which she had just taken her hand and pulled her out of the crowd. "Are you okay?" she asked in English, with a slight accent. Angelina nodded. Her voice trailed off for a moment. Only after a few deep breaths could she say, Did you know I was there?" "I saw everyone moving," Samira replied calmly. "But no one did anything." These words were spoken without any judgment, but they penetrated the very essence of what had happened. No one acted. The silence between them was dense, but not tense. Samira looked around. "It's dangerous here now. If you want, you can stay with me." A small room in a service container. "It's quiet there," and again not a suggestion. Not a request. Just an act. Like the one that saved her life, the container in which Samira lived with her 3 children was narrow and clean. One lamp, an old mattress, a makeshift shelf with books she had found in the camp. On the floor a colorful rug sewn from scraps of clothes. On the wall a photograph of the man she had lost 2 years earlier. His name was Ahmed. "He died when we were fleeing the city." Her voice did not waver. This wasn't the first time she had said this. "Are you a teacher?" Angelina asked cautiously, noticing the textbooks. "I was. Before the war." Then Angelina took a small notebook and pen from her bag. She hadn't planned on keeping a diary this time. "But this story, this woman wasn't to be lost. Can I write it down a bit?" Samira nodded. Her eyes softened. "If anyone is interested." Angelina looked at her the way people who have had their meaning restored look at them. People should know that. She had spent almost 2 hours in that container. During all that time, Samira hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't begged, she hadn't complained. She had simply talked, about escaping, about the children, about the new living conditions, about how she had taught herself not to cry in front of children, but there was one thing she hadn't told: her own name. She only said it for the first time when Angelina asked. Samira. A simple name. Not loud. Not known. Not recorded in the lists of heroes, and that was what seemed the most terrible thing. She had saved a world-class star, but she could have disappeared into the statistics, like thousands of others. When the guards returned for Angelina, she was already holding her notebook in her hands, full of Samira's words. She left the container not with a feeling of fatigue or fear, but with a clear goal. "I want this story to become public," she said directly to her escort. "What story?" one of them asked. "The story of the woman who saved me. I want it to be heard in every country where films with my participation are watched. Not as news, but as an example." They didn't immediately understand the seriousness of her tone, but she already knew. Samira, this mother who never wanted recognition, was to become a symbol of humanity. Not a movie heroine. A heroine of life. A little over a week passed. Angelina returned to Los Angeles, but not for premieres, not for interviews, and not for filming. She returned a different person. Those days in the camp, the conversation in the cramped container, Samira's voice, all this did not let go. On the contrary, it became an obsessive silence that haunts thoughts in empty hotel rooms and on board first class. Her agent suggested a smart PR move, tell the story on a talk show, show her humanity, and touch hearts before the release of the new film. She was silent. Then she looked straight into my eyes and said, "I will not tell this story until I know that it will be done right. This is not content. This is an action," and she started with the simplest thing. The first step was a letter official, but written from the heart. Angelina addressed it to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. In it, she asked, to find a mechanism to recognize ordinary people who change lives through their actions without awards, without cameras. Just so that the world knows about them. Because otherwise we betray the very thing we are trying to protect. At the same time, she turned to small independent media outlets, not tabloids. She chose a journalist she had worked with during her missions in Cambodia, the one who didn't ask the easy questions but always looked for meaning. They met in a quiet cafe. "I don't want this story to be about me," Angelina said. "Then about who?" the journalist asked. "About her. About Samira. About every mother who saves not only herself but also others and doesn't ask for anything in return." The publication came out 2 days later. It didn't have Angelina's photo in the center. Just the headline, "A name that should not disappear, Samira from Camp 14, there was no pathos in the article. Just a simple story about a moment. About how one woman, tired of war, saved another not because she was a star, but because she was there, and the reaction was not long in coming. The first to respond were mothers from all over the world, from Afghanistan, Poland, Argentina, Senegal. They wrote, "I know Samira. There was a woman like that in my life too." Then the journalist reported, the site had temporarily crashed, there were too many visitors. And a few days later, the story hit the international news. Angelina did not stay away. She turned to several influential women writers, politicians, actresses, who supported humanitarian missions. Together they created a foundation with a simple goal, to tell the stories of invisible women who do great things in small circumstances, and the first of them was Samira. Meanwhile, in the camp, thousands of kilometers away, a woman who had never asked for anything noticed that something had changed. She began to be recognized. Volunteers began to stop, say, "Thank you," sometimes just smile. One doctor brought her a new mattress. Another family offered to help with her children's education. At first, Samira didn't understand. Then someone showed her a printed article with her name, with a story. With a truth that she hadn't tried to tell, but that had sprouted anyway. She sat on the same carpet in the container, holding the sheet in her hands, for a long time. "Mom, is that you?" her youngest son asked. She smiled, not proudly, not loudly. Just quietly. "Yes, son. But it's also about you. Because we are stronger than we seem," and in that moment, not at the UN, not in a TV studio, but there, among the dust and silence, something real happened. A woman who had every chance of being forgotten became part of a voice that speaks not for fame, but for memory. A little over a month had passed since that publication, and Angelina still felt that this was only the beginning. She hadn't forgotten Samira. She couldn't. Because something about that impulse, the simple, quick movement of a woman who didn't look back or hesitate, touched the deepest part of her soul. Not the part of the actress. The part of the person. What had initially been just a voice of gratitude gradually turned into a movement. In New York, in the closed room of the UN branch, a private meeting took place. No press. No formalities. Angelina stood before a circle of people, diplomats, mission coordinators, representatives of humanitarian organizations. She wasn't reading from a sheet of paper. She spoke like a mother, like a woman, like someone who had seen pain up close. We all talk about systems, she began. But sometimes one can change no less than 1,000 policies. She told Samira's story. No embellishments. No exaggerations that we call it an act of kindness. But the truth is that she did what professionals with walkie-talkies and instructions could not do. She acted because her heart would not allow otherwise. Her words hung in the air, and if such a person does not have a name in our system, then perhaps the problem is not her, but our system. After the speech, an old diplomat from Lebanon approached her. She held Jolie's hand for a few seconds longer than she should have. You gave her a voice. And therefore, all of us. Women who are not heard. These words became the final point. The next morning, Angelina gathered her team. We will create a documentary project. But not about me. And not just about Samira. About all those like her. A series? They asked. No. Archive. Oral history of humanity. Real women. Their names. Their voices. She already knew the name. Those who pull the world. In parallel, in the camp, Samira lived as before. She cooked food, washed her children's clothes by hand, helped other women write appeals to local authorities, but something had changed, not outside, inside. Now others came to her. They asked for advice. They sought support. Her silence became a safe space for many. And one of her neighbors, a young widow with a newborn, once said, "You have become our loud shadow." What does that mean? Samira smiled. That when we are afraid to speak, you stand by and the world hears anyway. And then something happened that she definitely did not expect. That a few weeks later, a group from Angelina's project arrived at the camp. Journalists, documentarians, translators. They didn't bring cameras right away. At first, they just listened, and when they asked if she wanted to tell her story in front of a microphone, Samira was silent for a long time. I don't need gratitude, she said. But if my voice helps at least one woman find strength in herself, then I will speak. The recording was simple. Point: one room. One chair. One voice. Samira spoke calmly. About loss. About fear. About the moment when she grabbed Jolie's hand, not knowing who she was, not thinking about the consequences. I saw a person who was in danger. And acted like a mother. That's all. And then she added, my name is Samira. I'm not an actress. I'm not a soldier. I'm just a woman. But I also have the right to a voice. When the recording was released to the public, it didn't go viral. But it did reach those who were willing to listen, and among those who saw it were women from refugee camps, from small towns in Africa, from mountain villages in Nepal, from the alleys of Haiti. They started writing. Sending their stories. And each one began the same way. I am just like Samira. Angelina sat on the floor of her office, looking through the letters, videos, messages. She smiled, because she knew, one day someone would say that she had done a lot in her life, but she would always know, the most important thing was not what she had done, but who she had heard. A year had passed. When Angelina recalled that day in the camp, she didn't remember the fear. She didn't remember the crowd, the confusion, or the flashes of danger. Only one thing remained in her memory, a warm, strong hand that pulled her out of the chaos silently, without a word. And Samira's eyes, straight, calm, as if she was doing what she always did, saving someone because she simply couldn't do otherwise, but the world didn't leave it to her memory alone. Samira's story, told first in modest material and then in a series of quiet, truthful speeches, began to sprout, not as a sensation, but as a seed. All over the world in those places where television is silent but hearts are heard, invisible lines began to appear, connecting women who had never seen each other. In Nigeria, a young midwife created a safe corner for girls fleeing violence and wrote on the door, "This is where Samira is remembered." In Bangladesh, a woman who cooked meals for 60 children in a camp every day told a reporter, "I don't know anything about the UN or actresses. But I know that when one woman speaks up, others don't give up." In Chile, a teacher started a school initiative called Strong Shadow, where students wrote letters to invisible heroes, and everywhere, from Pakistan to Norway, Samira's story was read to mothers. Not out loud, but at night. After everyone had fallen asleep. Quietly, like a prayer, Angelina, meanwhile, continued. But not as an actress, and not even as an ambassador. She became a spokesperson for those who didn't ask for a spokesperson. The Those Who Pull the World project became an international program, supported by dozens of cultural organizations. There were no commercials. Only voices, women's, from camps, mountains, settlements, which for years were only the backdrop to major events, and at the center of these voices not stars, not politicians, not book heroes, but a simple mother from camp number 14. One evening in Geneva, where a photo exhibition dedicated to the stories of women from the world's crisis zones was taking place, a new section opened. One story. One act. Thousands of changes. There was no portrait of Samira there. Only an empty space on the wall. Next to it was a sheet with the inscription, "This is a place for those who were not photographed, but who saved the world at the right moment." Below that was her name, Samira. Meanwhile, life in the camp continued. Samira did not move. She refused the apartment in the capital that they wanted to give her because of honorary recognition. She stayed. And as she told her neighbors, "I'm not here because I can't leave. I'm here because no one else is left but us." She organized shadow meetings, where women gathered and just talked. Without a goal. Without the need for a plan. Just shared fear, hope, the past, and one day, when new refugee girls from a neighboring province arrived at the camp, one of them, still just a child, timidly raised her hand and asked, "Are you Samira?" And when she nodded, the girl whispered, "Mom told me you existed. We thought you were a fictional character." That same day, Angelina arrived at the camp unannounced. They hadn't seen Samira for almost a year. She got out of the car, now without guards, without cameras, and found the old container, still in its place. The door was open. Samira was sitting by the entrance, mending an old blanket. They saw each other in silence. No loud words, just two deep looks. Then Angelina said, "Do you know that your act started something that we can't even measure?" Samira smiled. "I only know one thing, when you saved me, the world didn't stop. But when we talk, it listens a little." And that night, under the stars, in a camp without a name, two women sat on an old bench and talked, about fatigue, about faith, about everything that is yet to come, because their story is not over yet. The next morning, after a night of talking on a bench under the stars, Angelina woke up early. She dreamed of Samira, not in the camp, not in a container, but in a large, bright room, where the walls were covered with children's drawings. She was talking to the girls, holding books in her hands, and the whole space around her breathed of safety. When Jolie opened her eyes, her heart was beating differently. Not fast. Deeply, and she knew, this story was not over yet, because now something new must grow. After breakfast, she and Samira walked around the campgrounds. The children reached out to them, the women smiled. Not like a star. Like someone who was really listening. Do you remember that day? Angelina asked quietly. Samira stopped. All I remember is that she took a step without hesitation. Because every mother would do that. Not everyone, Jolie answered. But maybe everyone could, if they had seen the world in time. And then she shared what she wanted to say that night, but didn't dare. I want to build a house here. Not a shelter. Not a center. A house for women. For children. A place where you can come not only when you're in pain, but when you want to live. Samira looked at her for a long time. And call it? Angelina smiled. Samira's house. That project wasn't a big deal. It started with a tree. Samira chose it herself, a tall, fragile one, with young branches. The first stone was laid next to it. No cameras. Just the women of the camp, the children, a few volunteers. And Angelina, who simply held a shovel in her hands and worked nearby. A month later, the foundation was there. 3 months later, the walls. 8 months later, the house, and when Samira's house opened its doors, there was no official ribbon cutting. But each child in the camp that day received a sheet of paper and colored pencils. They drew what this space had become for them. On the wall, near the entrance, they left one inscription. Simple. But eternal. This place arose from one movement of the hand. The one that didn't let me fall. 6 months later, Samira's house was already functioning as a center, a children's room, classrooms, a medical corner, and a room of silence. Right there, in the center, stood a chair similar to the one Samira sat in when she gave her first interview, and every week in this room, one woman told her story. Not for the world. For herself. And for those who are still afraid to start. In New York, meanwhile, Angelina's project received a new format, Living Shadows. These were interactive exhibitions where visitors not only listened to the women's stories, but also had the opportunity to leave a letter that was delivered to the camps. One of these letters reached Samira. It was short. I am 14. I have never heard of anyone who looks like me. Now I know I am not alone. Signed, Aisha, Kabul. Samira kept this letter in a silk bag where she had previously kept only a photo of her late husband. Angelina's last visit was unexpected. She came to Samira's house, alone. Unannounced. She sat on a bench in the garden under the same tree that had been planted on the day of the opening. Samira left the classroom, carrying an old book in her hands, a collection of stories that the children had made up themselves. Imagine, she said. They used to run away from their dreams. Now they are creating their own. This is the best cinema, Angelina replied. They were silent for a long time. In a silence where nothing needed to be added, then Jolie said, I wrote the script. But not for a movie. For what then? For a play. I want to put it on in schools. It doesn't have my name in it. But you are in every scene. Samira squeezed her hand. If even one child after this speaks up instead of being silent, it will be worth it. This story didn't become a movie. It became a home. It became a book without an author. A play without actors. It became a movement where every woman could be Samira just when it was needed most, because real stories don't end, they continue in other hands. In other voices. In other hearts.